Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we will study about application of remote sensing and GIS technique in groundwater study and water quality. From this module, we will learn about the groundwater flow system. We will learn how to make conceptual groundwater model for a particular region. From this module, we also learn about the application of remote sensing and GIS to understand the groundwater condition of an area using surfacial and geomorphological feature. And in this module, we also discussed how the groundwater conditions are different in the different geological terrain, and using remote sensing and GIS technique, how we can extract information about the groundwater from different terrain. Here we also discussed how the groundwater interact with the surface and surface water bodies. So using this feature, we also can get information about groundwater potential, groundwater head, groundwater flux, groundwater recharge and groundwater quality. And we can also apply remote sensing and GIS technique to assess the groundwater quality of an area. As we know, the groundwater quality is very much important for human health or for agriculture purpose. So spatial distribution of different chemical constituent in an area will help to recommend the locality to restrict their use for the domestic purpose. In the earth, 2.5% of water is fresh water that can be used by human being, and the remaining water is saline that cannot be used directly. In the country like India, 90% of rural population, they depend upon the groundwater, and 30% of urban population depend upon the groundwater. So it is important to study about the groundwater quality for its proper management and for sustainable future. So far we have studied about GIS technique and remote sensing technique, how we can apply this technique in different fields, for example forestry, wildlife, agricultural practice. Today we will discuss about the application of this technique for understanding groundwater quality, groundwater distribution. So in the earth surface, if you look at the groundwater, this groundwater occurrence of the groundwater that depend upon the lithology, rock type, climate, rainfall and various phenomena. So in this module, I have discussed about how we can use the surfacial feature to extract information about groundwater and its quality. The learning objective of this module is to explain what is conceptual model of groundwater flow system. Then we will apply this remote sensing and GIS technique to understand the hydraulic flux, hydraulic potential for a particular region. Then to understand the interaction between groundwater and the land surface. In this module, we will also try to understand how this groundwater is interacting with the different terrain. We will apply this technique to assess the groundwater quality. So demand of groundwater is increasing day by day, which leads to decline in groundwater level and anthropogenic activity deteriorating the quality. The occurrence and the distribution of groundwater is controlled by lithology, structure, geomorphology and rainfall pattern of an area. So detailed investigation of these controlling parameters are required for groundwater modeling and management. Groundwater modeling and management require reliable input data, which is most of the time difficult to obtain. Hence, the remote sensing and GIS technique provide an ample scope to generate input data to study groundwater and its quality of an area more efficiently at lower cost and time. However, validation, so we can apply this remote sensing and GIS for the groundwater study. So remote sensing provides information in space and time, and GIS techniques helps to store, interpret and retrieve spatial data. This technique is very successful for surface hydrology, but for the subsurface hydrology, remotely sensed images such as airborne and spaceborne images, passive and active microwave images, data from specific satellite sensor with different spatio-temporal or spectral resolutions are used to infer the groundwater behavior from surface expressions. The basic principle for the remote sensing groundwater is to find out the shallow water flow and its driving forces. So, to understand this the groundwater flow, we required how the groundwater flow within the subsurface. The rate and behavior of flow depend upon the geology and it can be expressed by the Darcy's law. This Darcy's law defines the flow of fluid in a porous medium and also states that there is a linear relationship between flow velocity and hydraulic gradient for any saturated soil or medium under steady laminar flow condition. This Darcy law can be stated as Q, that is equal to K and I. Here Q is specific discharge vector representing flow per unit area, that is also we called as a flux of groundwater. Then K is the hydraulic conductivity, which is a function of geology. I here is hydraulic gradient, which is a function of surface force. For preparation of groundwater model, we required to understand about that area, and here surface water is treated as a boundary condition for subsurface flow equation, which is based on the Darcy's law. So remotely sensed imageries are used to define boundary conditions such as streams, lake, wetlands, seepage areas, recharge zone or evapotranspiration zones for prediction of groundwater flow. The important mathematical boundary conditions are hydraulic head, hydraulic flux, discharge or mixed, both hydraulic head and hydraulic discharge. So, the remote sensing application in the groundwater study can be structured into the sensing of hydraulic potential, that is head, and hydraulic flux, that is discharge. Groundwater flow model of an area, we require to know what are the basic flow models of that particular region. So, the conceptual model for groundwater flow, which is based on the Tooth's conceptual model, that is mainly driven by this groundwater flow is topographically driven and for local and regional scale. So, in the local scale, if you look at this picture, in the upper part of the picture, you can see these local flow systems where the arrow mark indicates the flow direction. These local flow systems, their flow direction and it mainly depend upon the topographic variation of that particular region. And in case of intermediate flow system, that is the scale is large scale systems where it takes longer time to migrate this groundwater from one part to another part. And in the regional flow system, that takes quite longer time. If you look at the local flow system to regional flow system, in case of local flow system, it may take a day to move for the movement of the groundwater, but in case of intermediate flow system, it is in week time scale, or if you look at the regional flow system, it may take months to year. That again depend upon the areal extent of that particular regional flow system. We will see about the hydraulic head and groundwater flow system. Here in the schematic diagram, we can see the distribution of hydraulic head. Here the arrow mark indicates the groundwater flow lines and the dotted lines is indicating line of equal hydraulic head, and the solid line is in the top, it indicates the water table. Here we can see the groundwater flow lines, that is from the higher elevation to lower, the flow direction is from higher elevation to lower elevation. Here the flow mainly controlled by the topography. So, in the upper part, the infiltration, that may be locally or regionally, that will rainwater will infiltrate at the higher elevation and it will reach the groundwater water table, and this groundwater flow that will move along with the control line. Here the dotted line, if you see, that is the line of equal hydraulic head. At each point the pressure of this groundwater will be equal. In the lower part of this diagram, the dotted lines, that they are saturated zone, and the white area, that is unsaturated zones. So if you look at the middle of the diagram, there you can see the local discharge area, that is shallow. In this picture we can see the river act as a regional discharge area, river or the major stream that can act as a major regional discharge area, while this small stream or sheep that can act as a local discharge area where your water table intersect your land surface. To measure groundwater head, sensors like visible, microwave and gravity sensor may be used. Groundwater storage and hydraulic gradient can be deduced from the hydraulic head. This can be inferred from different parameters. The first one will discuss about the surface water elevation. Generally, the elevation of surface water depicts the possible groundwater head of that region. Therefore, spring or first order stream originates an elevation where water table intersects the slope. Using satellite based altimetry or interferometry of obtaining surface water elevation provides higher accuracy compared to digital elevation model and topographic digital line graphs. We can use these satellite images to get information about the surface water elevation of that region. So second parameter is water column mass. So water storage in the subsurface and hydraulic head in an aquifer can be estimated using satellite or aerial gravity survey. This method is useful for studying very large aquifer system due to very coarse spatial resolution. Influence from water present in the atmosphere and vegetation and unsaturated water content, that is soil moisture, have to be removed to enhance the accuracy in estimate of saturated water mass. This aerial gravity survey generally infer the mass difference in the earth surface. Wherever in the aquifer where water is stored, that weight will be heavier. So it will be detected by the aerial gravity survey. Minute difference in the mass that can be reflected in the aerial gravity survey images. So the data obtained from NASA gravity recovery and climate experiment, that is GRACE satellite, proved to be an asset for estimating ground storage in different region. Third parameter is heat capacity. Heat capacity of saturated soil is higher than the dry soil. Using this property of soil, depth of water table can be estimated from remotely sensed thermal image. This technique is very useful to locate shallow water table, and this was proposed by Cartwright in 1968 and Chase in 1969 in the early days of remote sensing application. The fourth parameter is land subsidence. Groundwater generally occupy the pore space of the sediment. In case of unconsolidated sediment, addition, that is recharge, or withdrawal, that is depletion of water from the pore space, will change the net volume. During recharge, effective pressure will be high in the pore space, hence it will increase the volume as well as water table. Withdrawal of water will cause reduction in the pore pressure, which leads to decrease in volume and compaction of unconsolidated sediment. This will result in land subsidence. This volume change will be reflected as variation in the surface elevation. Although this variation is small, it can be measured by interferometry synthetic aperture radar, that is INSAR. There are examples where the subsidence can go up to 32 meter. For example, in the California Valley, there due to excess pumping of groundwater, unconsolidated sediment has subsided to 32 meter in 52 years. So using subsidence, we can know about the water table depth and water table storage. The fifth point is soil moisture. Presence of shallow water table can be predicted based on the soil moisture content. Different remote sensing method has been applied extensively to delineate shallow water table from soil moisture content and vegetation stress or proliferation. Visible and infrared sensor is used to monitor the change of vegetation cover, agricultural performance, which can be linked with the waterlogging or change in the soil moisture content. The Next aspect of this application is sensing groundwater flux. At many places, groundwater flow is driven by topography, as we have discussed earlier, where it gets recharge at higher elevation and discharge at lower elevation. Different remote sensing methods are being applied effectively to find out the interference between groundwater and surface water or land surface. These interfaces are manifested as lakes, stream, spring or seep in the surface. Discharge of groundwater transfer heat and chemical constituents to the surface, which can be detected by remote sensing method. This is also reflected by the vegetation cover in the interface as water uptake of plant is changed. So first we will take example of spring and seep. Spring and seep develops at the interface of water table and surface. This water table or groundwater layer is confined by impervious layer, that may be clay unit or low permeable rock or structural unit like fractured rock, which facilitate to form focused discharge points. If you look at the diagram in the right side, there you can see the springs are originating from the above confined zone where this line of spring can be seen. So similarly, from the image we can know about the groundwater position of an area. So using infrared thermal analysis, spring or seep may be detected as it shows contrasting temperature with respect to surrounding area. At many instances, the groundwater is saturated with different mineral phase, which leads to precipitation of secondary minerals and staining in the rock near spring and seep. So using this also we can find out the position of spring, and that will let us know about the hydraulic head of that particular area. Similarly, if you look at the base flow of stream, this base flow of a stream is mainly controlled by the discharge of groundwater to the stream. Quantifying the base flow of a stream is not possible from the remote sensing method directly, but field data from stream gauge network will help to estimate the base flow. In the absence of field data, theoretically we can estimate the base flow from the stream cross section and surface velocity. Maps can be prepared for hydrological assessment of a region using average base flow index. This BFI, that is base flow index, that is the fraction of stream flow attributes to the base flow of different watershed. The region with higher BFI is more feasible to assess the groundwater flow using remote sensing method. Multiple remote sensing image and time series field data are being used to estimate the groundwater flux and its flow. From this diagram, we can see the interrelationship between surface water and groundwater. Here you can see the groundwater, wherever it intersects the land surface, there we will see the surface water bodies. For example, in the left side of the picture, we can see the level of lake or wetland, which is mainly controlled by the position of the water table. Similarly, in the middle of the picture, we can see the small river base flow that is mainly supplied by the groundwater. This water table in the different region, that will fluctuate seasonally. For example, in the dry season, the groundwater table will go down. That time the base flow will be reduced or level will be less. In case of winter or rainy season, the groundwater table will increase and the base flow in the river will be higher. So in this diagram you can also see there are different river seepages through which this groundwater will get recharged. So this will be two-way. Either the water from the water table, it will discharge to the river, or from river this groundwater will get recharged during dry or different season. And if you look at the right side of the figure, there the sea, water table and land surface, all the interface you can see. And there are two wells you can see there. These wells are vulnerable for saline water intrusion. For example, if we pump excess, then water table will decrease, and in the confined zone, seawater can intrude into the land part. So in that way, it will affect the groundwater quality. Inflow of groundwater to standing water bodies. So estimation of inflow of groundwater to standing water bodies like lake, estuary is more challenging than the interaction between groundwater and stream or spring or seep. It is important to perform the water balance of standing water bodies by identifying various possible inlets and outlets of the surface water. Remote sensing method can be applied to quantify the spatial distribution of groundwater discharge to the standing water body based on the thermal, chemical or vegetation signature. In the chemical, we also consider the salinity of that water. Groundwater discharge is maximum near the shoreline or bank of the lake or estuary, and this will change the water temperature due to mixing. This thermal signature can be detected from airborne thermal infrared multispectral scanner TIMS image. This also helps to identify whether the discharge is focused or distributed in an area. The interaction of groundwater and land surface. Surplus water after evaporation infiltrates the surface and recharges the groundwater table. Vegetation cover is also control the infiltration of surface water, hence it regulates the groundwater recharge. Growth, speciation and abundance of vegetation of a region is depend upon the availability of water and nutrients, atmospheric moisture content, salinity and acidity or alkalinity of the soil. Different plant species provides clue to the occurrence of groundwater, but the link between them varies considerably in different climatic regime. In the arid environment, groundwater discharge or shallow water table is the only source of water for vegetation, whereas in the humid climate region, it is more complex. Soil chemistry also play a major role to support selective plant species. Hence, while considering the vegetation species assemblage to study the groundwater condition, data on soil chemistry should be taken into consider for groundwater information. Groundwater and land surface is continued. Distribution, growth and type of plant species are used as an indicator in the remote sensing and GIS method to determine the groundwater conditions. However, it is difficult to estimate the change of groundwater flow from vegetation cover due to its late response to the flow change. Some researchers classified vegetation cover using principal component analysis to study the groundwater discharge in wetland. They also estimated the flow rate and travel time using combined data of remote sensing and hydrochemistry in GIS grass environment. Although based on the type of vegetation indicator, classifying interaction of groundwater with surface, that is discharge or discharge area, appears simple, but in practice it is tricky. Another important aspect is vegetation moisture flux. Here, this parameter is required for developing a model to study a hydrological cycle. Without the hydrological cycle of that particular region, it is difficult to get information about the groundwater. The model has been developed to consider the contribution from soil, vegetation and atmospheric transfer of moisture. That model is called as SVAT. S stands for soil, V stands for vegetation, AT stands for atmosphere transfer. SVAT model are being used for shallow surface study, but it doesn't have much application directly on groundwater study. However, SVAT model has been coupled with groundwater flow infinite difference model MODFlow for understanding groundwater. Generally, the residence time of groundwater is longer than the soil and atmospheric water. Hence, change in the groundwater condition is also in the longer time scale compared to the atmospheric water and soil water. Shallow surface, subsurface water or soil water is subjected to differential drying or evapotranspiration locally, but in the large scale it is more or less uniform. So, different models have been used in combination to predict movement of groundwater. Combination of water table depend upon the Vadose zone model and MODFlow, which is used to delineate recharge and discharge zone and to predict movement of net soil water. Remotely sensed image depict the terrain and sometimes provide valuable information about the subsurface geology. Hence, interpretation of this image for extracting information about the groundwater required expertise and background knowledge about the terrain. Information about superficial feature which control the recharge, groundwater outflow, configuration of subsurface geology are targeted during interpretation of images. Same geological formation may appear differently in the image due to local weathering condition, erosion or accumulation of sediment or debris. Sometimes vegetation cover masks the outcrop. Hence, field verifications are required. Image interpretations are generally gets validated using fieldwork, geological map, geophysical and drill hole data. While interpreting surface feature for groundwater study, various topographic evidence are being examined based on the hydrological property of outcrop of any geological formation. Some of them are permeable conditions such as thick sand, colluvial deposit or non-erode thick soils over dipping rock sequence, type of surface runoff, presence of lineament and its association with vegetation, presence of water in rivulets, disappearance of base flow in the riverbed indicating infiltration or loss to the rock formation or larger fractures, or reappearance of water further downstream indicating the alluvial fan aquifer. Hydrological property will be depend upon the climate, geology and geomorphology. So, for groundwater study, geomorphological interpretation is very important. For example, drainage density can be directly linked with the permeability of the region, as low drainage density indicate high permeable condition, but it is not always true. Many instances, for example, sheet wash dominated area, over pediments, crystalline basement rock or presence of impermeable rocks, that leads to development of low drainage density. Hence, it is tricky to interpret the image based on the drainage density. Hydrological image interpretation of different geological terrain required basic understanding of geology of that region. Terrain consisting of unconsolidated sediment, mostly the quaternary deposit, have been extensively studied for groundwater exploration, withdrawal and management. Preliminary investigation of this deposit are to know the geomorphological process, that is fluvial, aeolian, coastal, lacustrine or glacial, which is responsible for development of this deposit and type of material. Generally, this deposit conceals the complex subsurface feature which has no or very little surface expression. Such areas are investigated by different remote sensing images like thermal, infrared image, soil moisture study in combination with other field and geophysical data. We will take one example for unconsolidated sediment. Let us take an example of alluvial fan. These alluvial fans are formed in mountain front where river lost its carrying capacity of sediments due to abrupt change in the slope. Due to aggradation, river shift its channel to the lower area. These deposits are mainly consist of poorly shutted river bed loads, which is also called as fanglomerates, which is permeable and it gets recharged easily by mountain front runoff. Upper reach of the fan has coarser grain compared to the middle and lower reach. Middle part of the fan shows more shutted river deposit and lower part of the fan shows finer sediments. Alluvial fan is considered to be well-defined flow system and also form much of the conceptual groundwater model. Upper reach of the fan act as a recharge area and runoff from the small river in the mountain front provide pressure head for flow system developed in the fan. In the alluvial fan, water intake is in the permeable upper part, shows phreatic conditions, and in the middle part lateral groundwater flow is dominant. Due to the presence of finer sediments, mostly clay and silt, phreatic conditions makes for a semi-confined conditions in the lower part of the fan. In the lower part of the fan, upward groundwater flow cause appearance of the water in the riverbed. Seepage zones or even marshy area is found in the lower part of the alluvial fan. If you look at this alluvial fan, Here we can see that fans are developed in the mountain front, and here the upper part of the alluvial fan is mainly consisting of pebble and coarser grains, and middle part of the fan is mostly sandy and more shorted, and in the lower part is clay and silt area. So in the lower part they are more semi-confined zones, and here this change of phases from upper to the lower part, that will change the groundwater flow system. The arrow mark in this figure that indicates the direction of the groundwater flow in the fan. That is, this alluvial fan in an arid region of Death Valley, USA, with distinct difference between upper, middle and lower part, which is demarcated as UML in the diagram, and in the central part you can see FP, that is your flood plain. And if you compare both left and right side of the fan, these two fans have distinct provenance. So the groundwater flow system in the left and right left side fan and right side fan is distinct, and it is evident from the diagram. If you look at the left side, on fans on the left side, they have minor seepage on the lower part, whereas in the right side fan, the middle part of the fan, they are slightly dissected and has vegetation which you can see as a in the dark tone. Another example here, this is from the Tibet area. Here E indicates the groundwater emerge, and this one part of the diagram is enlarged in the left side. There we can see dark tone area, these are the irrigated area, and dense vegetation we can see along the channels where the groundwater seepage are there to the channel, and in the left side of the diagram we can see some old fans, some mud flows, and drainage divide also is indicated in the upper part of the diagram. So here recharge, mostly recharge by snow melt runoff and flash flood is sufficient to cause these streams perennial outflow. Now we will discuss about the volcanic terrain. Image interpretation of volcanic terrain for hydrological analysis is focused on the type of volcanic formation based on the geomorphology, demarcating of groundwater recharge and outflow areas, presence of spring and large fracture. Remotely sensed images are used to prepare preliminary hydrological mapping based on the information extracted from the image about the possible groundwater occurrence, groundwater flow system and recharge area. In the flood basalt terrain, groundwater occurrence are associated with weathered basalt, vesicular basalt and fractures, mostly the lineaments. Karst landforms are indicative of underground channel system with groundwater. Hence, it is important to analyze the landforms. So, remote sensing images are used to identify the different features such as large sinkholes, recent collapse, geological structure, etc. Sometimes it is difficult to recognize small scale features such as solution landforms, dolines, pseudo reliefs impression due to the shadow. Here, the stereo images are more suitable to map karst topography by visual interpretation. So, groundwater study on karst landforms requires information about the local and regional geological structure, and appropriate image interpretation is required. For hydrological study of karst terrain, remote sensing images are interpreted for mapping superficial feature related to the underground karst network, tracing the lineament associated with cavern or fissure conduit, orientation of caverns conduit along with the structural feature, determining bedding plane for two-dimensional flow for cave development, possible zone that is fracture or fault for high permeability and concentrated groundwater flow. This observation is also takes support from the geophysical survey and ground verification. Okay. So, the crystalline rock does not have the primary porosity or permeability, but the secondary porosity or permeability may develop in the regolith, that is weathered zone lying above the crystalline rock, or due to the presence of fracture. Occurrence of groundwater in the crystalline basement rock terrain is controlled by properties of weathered zone and fracture zone. The development of weather zone, the control of groundwater recharge is again controlled by the climate. Studies shows that fracture zone found under the regolith appears to be more liable for groundwater than the regolith. Sometimes fractures are filled with mineral, clay or density and the interconnectivity is less within the fracture. Hence, this affects the porosity and permeability of the rock. So, the complex interplay of types of fracture, development of regolith, climate, denudation history of an area affect the groundwater condition of the crystalline rock. Therefore, groundwater occurrence is highly site specific. However, remote sensing method proved to be an important tool to explore groundwater in the crystalline basement terrain with the help of local geological data. In India, hydrogeomorphological map have been prepared for different parts and it is widely used. Based on remote sensing method and ground survey, different aquifer system developed in the diverse terrain of India, which has been demarcated, and in the figure in the right side you can see the principal aquifer system of the India, and here all the aquifers are mainly named or divided based on their rock types. Remote sensing and GIS in water quality monitoring. For sustainable management and development of water resource, the monitoring water quality and quantity is very essential. Remote sensing and GIS techniques are used directly or indirectly for studying water quality and quantity with temporal changes, mainly for the river, lake, snow or glacier or groundwater resources. Concentration of specific parameters and specific properties of water are being monitored using suitable sensor for assessment of water quality. Emitted energy, that is reflectance of surface water, will change due to turbidity, presence of phytoplankton, algae, specific chemical constituents or dissolved organic matter, oil spill, etc. Based on the emitted energy from the water surface, which is recorded by different sensor, water quality is monitored and the change in the energy is studied by the remote sensing tools. So, first we will discuss about the turbidity. The suspended materials are common pollutant in the surface water. Different sensors carried by satellite, aircraft, aerial image are helpful for estimating this pollutant. Following empirical equation, we can use empirical equation for quantifying presence of suspended material or other dissolved organic or chemical constituents in water. So, we can take y equal to a plus bx, or we can also consider y equal to a into b to the power x. Here y is reflectance that we can estimate from ab and x. Here x is water quality parameter and a and b empirically derived factors. So, turbidity we can also, earlier equation can be rewritten based on the physical relationship model between spectral and physical properties of surface water by using following equation. Ri, that is equal to Bi 1 minus e to the power c by Si. Here Ri is the reflectance of surface water for specific waveband I. C is the concentration of suspended materials. Bi is the reflectance of surface water at saturation level of suspended material for waveband I. Si is the concentration parameter which is equal to the concentration for reflectance of 63% of saturation level in the waveband I. Similar to turbidity, presence of chlorophyll will change the reflectance of surface water. Hence, various algorithms and wavelength are used to monitor surface water bodies and eutrophication of lake. Seasonal change of chlorophyll concentration can be estimated using following equations. Here log base 10 chlorophyll can be estimated from a plus b and negative log of g base with base 10. Here g is R2 square by R1 into R3. Here AB are empirical value derived from in situ measurements. R1 to R3 are the radians at different wavelength. R1 here is radians at 460 nanometer, R2 is radians at 490 nanometer, R3 is radians at 520 nanometer. Now various satellite sensors like ICONS, Octus is ocean color and temperature scanner, MOS, that is modular optical scanners, are used for measuring chlorophyll in the surface water. Remote sensing and GIS techniques are also used for preparing maps showing spatial variation of groundwater quality parameters such as arsenic, fluoride, chloride, TDS. TDS is total dissolved solid, TH is total hardness, nitrate, iron, SAR. SAR is sodium absorption ratio, and bacterial contamination to identify affected area and for risk assessment. In addition to this, saltwater intrusion is another issue in the coastal area, which can also be studied by this method. For this study, groundwater samples are collected from predetermined area, followed by chemical analysis, and then maps for different chemical constituents are prepared. Generally, these maps carry the water quality index based on the different national, international standards, such as BIS, Bureau of Indian Standard, WHO, that is World Health Organization, for domestic use or irrigation purpose. So here you can see that flowchart for preparation of thematic map of groundwater quality. Initially, we have to get background information. Here we can see the flowchart for preparation of thematic map of groundwater quality. First, we have to have the background data collection. Then, based on the background data, we can prepare the grid for the study area. We can select sampling sites, and from the field work we will collect sample, and the samples will be analyzed in the lab for different chemical parameters, and the lab analysis data will be tabulated mostly in the Excel sheet or any table format we will store. And at the same time, based on the background data, spatial data will be digitized for the study area, and the sample sites will be identified and generation of. From the background data, we can take out the spatial data. Spatial data will be digitized for the study area. In that map, the sample sites will be digitized, and from that study map will be generated. Now the lab analysis data and study map both will be combined and digitized, and from this data we will generate thematic map for each chemical parameter. Based on the thematic map, we will try to see the spatial distribution of groundwater quality for drinking and irrigation purpose based on the national and international standard. From the thematic map, the spatial distribution of groundwater quality for drinking and irrigation purpose as per the national and international standard can be recommended, and the interpretation of this thematic map will help us to know the water quality of that particular area.